Hello everyone and welcome finally to the Dark Souls 3 lore reactions series. I'm so excited to finally sit down and react to VaatiVidya's Dark Souls 3 lore. Now, just to set the stage, I'm going to do this across multiple videos. I have not had a hell of a lot of time recently to get to this stuff. That's why it's taken so long. I've just mainly only really had time to focus on getting the game content out. But I've finally found some time to sit down and react to some amazing video content, as always, by VaatiVidya, who has given me Dark Souls 1 and 2 lore reaction series in the past to enjoy. It's been a hell of a lot of fun. We're going to react to his Dark Souls 3 series to round out that trilogy, which will be so much fun. And then we'll also look into eventually Prepare to Cry Remastered for Dark Souls 1. And then with Bloodborne lore, I think that's going to be the first time that we actually dip into some other creators as well to get the Bloodborne lore. So that's going to come as well. Don't worry about that. I am going to try and find time to get through it all, because I know you guys have been asking for it, begging for it, and demanding it for such a long time. But like I say, like I've said this time and time again, this is not my full-time thing. I would like it to be. It might be soon. Who knows? We'll just have to see how that goes. But like in the small amount of time that I have, we're going to sit down and we're going to get into this lore reaction. So thank you so much for tuning in already. I'm so glad you're here to react to this one with me. The Dark Souls 3 playthrough was incredibly important to me in like my gaming history. It's one of my top games of all time for sure. Dark Souls 3 is definitely just a very special game to me, and I had a lot of fun, and I hope you guys had a lot of fun going through that playthrough with me as well. So we're going to react to the lore of the main bosses and the optional bosses today. So 2 videos in one to get all of that sweet boss lore, and then we'll have to see what other videos there are for us to react to next time. So let's get into lore of the main bosses to start. I'm very excited to see how this one's going to go.
The stories of Souls games have always revolved around bosses, but that statement has never been more true than for Dark Souls 3. If you understand who you're killing in this game, then you will understand the story. The first one in your way is Iudex Gundyr, the Ashen Judge and scabbard to the coiled sword of the shrine. This sword is bequeathed only to chosen Ash who can best him in battle. But before he was the Ashen Judge, Gundyr walked through this place much like we did, on his way to meet his Firekeeper and link the fire. Charged with the duty and granted a cast iron halberd that would never crumble, Gundyr arrived, late, greeted by a shrine without fire and a bell that would not toll. The flame had already faded, and his Firekeeper had been thrown into the depths of the bell tower, grave of Firekeepers past. She never met her champion, and the ensuing tragic farce became a favorite tale of the masses.
Can I just point out immediately, and this is because I would like to say at my first pause, this is not going to just be me silently watching this video for 30 minutes. I would like to provide my thoughts. It's definitely a reaction, analysis, and discussion as well. I'd like there to be a back and forth, because I want to share how I view this stuff and how I'm taking this information. I want to make sure that it's got a bit of my involvement in it as well, especially relating it to my playthrough. But I do just want to say, right off the bat, this is absolutely fantastic formatting, because every time he's speaking and going into different different descriptions and stuff, I love that he's providing a source for which item in the game he got the lore from and how he's like constructing the story of that. That's really cool, and something that he's done in previous videos, but it's really cool to see here, is cosplaying and dressing up as the characters and running through there. So we're getting not only are we getting really good audio in terms of like describing the story, but we're getting some really good visuals of visualizing the story of Iudex Gundyr, and you know, obviously what we've come to learn about him at the towards the end of the game with the filing shrine that's gone dark. You know, this is really cool stuff.
And after he was bested by an unknown warrior, which is probably us, Gundyr the champion became sheathed to a coiled sword in the hopes that someday the first flame would be linked once more. Perhaps Gundyr, with his unbreakable halberd, was fated to eternal service from the beginning. Since it's implied that Gundyr expected to meet a firekeeper, he was likely meant as a candidate for linking the fire. Those capable of linking the fire are named Lords of Cinder, beings capable of bringing back the world from the brink of darkness by linking the first flame. Indeed, the game speaks of 3 Lords of Cinder who have already linked the fire, and they're being resurrected as a last resort to link it once again. In the opening cutscene, you saw them: Aldrich, Saint of the Deep, Yorm the Giant, and Farron's Abyss Watchers. Each of these lords once had an age of their own, and the remnants of their age lives on in Dark Souls 3 and in their resurrection. For example,
so fucking cool,
Aldrich
man.
is linked to these bosses and their stories. The Abyss Watchers are linked here, and those in Lothric are conjoined here. For simplicity's sake, we're going to discuss these stories in 3 chunks, starting with Aldrich, Pontiff Sullivan, Vort, and the Dancer, who all reside in the Boreal Valley.
Cool.
The Boreal Valley
This is so cool.
ruled over by Pontiff Sullivan, a tyrant who sends his Outrider Knights to serve as his watchful eyes and his guards. And the first knight of Pontiff Sullivan we meet is Vort, an Outrider Knight who ambushes us as we attempt to leave Lothric. So the Outrider Knight's job is to keep an eye on things. Sullivan's knights are also described as his watchful eyes and his punitive blades. Each Outrider Knight is provided with a ring by the Pontiff, which transforms them into frenzied beasts and lures them into battles of death. Specifically, the 2 main Outrider Knights we see upon the high wall of Lothric appear at both points of progression in the area, so perhaps they serve as strategically placed guards in order to hinder our progression, and
True.
for Sullivan to keep an eye on the world.
Yeah, Dancer and Vort are so close together, hey?
Those ghosts that seem to be walking the streets, well, they likely represent the Outrider Knights before their departure and descent into madness, because 2 in particular are very interesting. They walk together, 1 man, 1 female, and the woman wears the mask of the Dancer.
She does too.
Was never far from the fleeting Dancer.
Wow.
Emma in Lothric's Grand Cathedral. The Dancer is far more intriguing than Vort is. The Pontiff ordered her to serve as a dancer, and then he ordered her to serve as his Outrider Knight. He bestowed enchanted swords upon her, 1 dark and 1 light, mirrored
Just like his swords, yeah.
The black eyes of the Pontiff transformed her into a beastly creature, her gauntlets fusing with her own hide. The fascinating thing about the Dancer, though, is who she was before she became Sullivan's pet. It's a very popular theory that she is one of the 3 daughters of Guinevere who appear in-game.
What?
Here's the evidence. Her Aurora Veil is said to be an article of the Old Gods, which is permitted only for direct descendants of the old royal family. The Dancer's soul can also be transposed to give you the spell Soothing Sunlight, miracle of Guinevere of the old royalty. Guinevere used to reside in Anor Londo, home of the gods, and her line continues in Lothric. So Guinevere was also revered as a goddess of fertility and bounty. She raised many heavenly children, and the Dancer, having one of the 3 sunlight spells, is clearly one of them.
It's really cool how we will always take, Vaati is really good at like speculating and constructing his own storylines, when he sees stuff in the lore and he puts pieces together and he's like, look at this means this. And it's really cool to think about because there are things that that does not even cross my mind, that he's like, yeah, so Dancer might be potentially one of the daughters of Guinevere. And it's just like, oh my god, just the thought of it, whether it's true or not, whether anything, turns out to be real. I just love the different things people can glean from Souls lore in general and how they piece the story together through the world and the items and all of that kind of stuff. That's really cool. That's just one of the first things that has definitely blown my mind, just even as an observation or just linking that back to Guinevere. Because being able to get a miracle of Guinevere, transposing it from her soul, definitely feels like it says a lot as well.
And of course, as you know, Pontiff Sullivan, the tyrant, now rules over Irithyll and Anor Londo, so it's my belief that Sullivan gained power within Anor Londo, then proclaimed himself Pontiff, and ordered Guinevere's daughter to serve as his dancer, and then outride a knight. The royal family was usurped and devoured and torn apart by Sullivan, who, Yorshka says, wrongfully proclaimed himself Pontiff. Even after the family's passing, the Silver Knights looked over their manor and the ruined cathedral. The story behind Pontiff Sullivan's rise to power is told lightly, with only clues peeking above the surface, but in a nutshell, I believe Pontiff Sullivan took over Anor Londo from within, probably with the help of the Deacons of the Deep, the only ones in his
that parry,
Knights.
that Pontiff parry.
Knights were once led by my elder brother, the Dark Sun Gwyndolin, but he was stricken by illness, and leadership of the Knights fell to me. Then Sullivan wrongfully proclaimed himself Pontiff, and took me prisoner. Oh, where could my dear brother be?
So when I say that Pontiff Sullivan took over Anor Londo from within, it is speculation on my part, but my reasoning is that he knew of Gwyndolin, and he knew of Yorshka, and he wrongfully proclaimed himself Pontiff, which all imply that he was a part of the system already. A Pontiff is essentially a high priest, and the miracles, the weaponry, and the rings of the Dark Moon all rely on faith. Additionally, there's a bit more evidence that the Pontiff was a part of the Dark Moon system already. The sword in his left hand is a ceremonial sword representing the judgment of the moon. However, its magic is far closer to sorcery than any existing lunar power.
Just to go back to Yorshka, is I'm not sure if I got that dialogue from her, because we did speak to Yorshka for a little bit. I wonder if more dialogue comes from her when you actually get involved in the Covenant and actually do stuff, because I don't remember that dialogue, because that's pretty significant if that flew right over my head, if I've heard that before. I don't think I have, but Gwyndolin's brother, Yorshka, oh man, I'm trying to grab back at like previous lore and stuff in the game, but there was Gwyn, who then had 3 children, which was Guinevere, Gwyndolin, who was raised as a daughter, and then the Firstborn, which the name was strucken from the records, which is like the Nameless King, right? So if there's a brother of Gwyndolin outside of that trio, I'm assuming it would be like a half brother. Like who's the mother? Who's the mother of who's Gwyn's wife? Who did Gwyn, have these children with? I've forgotten that detail, if that's ever been revealed. And then did Gwyn's wife or Gwyn go off and have fun with some other people? I don't know. I'll have to get a brush up on that, but that's I'm just like pulling a blank on whether that information was given to me before. Especially because Yorshka is like also seemingly very similar to Priscilla in terms of the dragon sort of influence in their appearance.
Its dark blue hues, deeper than the darkest moon, reflect Sorcerer Sullivan's true nature. Yorshka calls Sullivan a tyrant, which can mean someone who elects themselves ruler without legal right. This, along with his Greatsword of Judgment that references the moon, furthers that idea that he took over from within, the figurehead of a movement that was abandoning their faith in favor of Sullivan's true calling, dark sorceries. And the same sort of shift.
Such a cool shot, just having him do all of his combos
all throughout Anor Londo.
with the free camera.
They were a group of clergymen dedicated to sealing away the potential horrors of the deep. Deep Protection tells us that the deep was originally a peaceful and sacred place, its deacons wearing dark red robes denoting their blessing of fire. Over time, however, the deep became the final rest for many abhorrent things.
This is a Bloodborne enemy.
Likely some of those things,
That's a Bloodborne enemy.
Humanity are said to sink to the lowest depths imaginable, forming the bedrock of the world. Those who linger too long on the brink of the deep will often slip, and lurking within the deep are insects which tear open the skin and burrow into flesh. Eventually, those dedicated to sealing away the horrors of the deep succumb to its very power. An example of this is their Tome of Knowledge, which was originally intended to teach divine protection, but it had dark tales added to its pages, making it a thing most profane.
God, I love the free camera, like, going through all the enemies. That's really, really cool.
Saint of the Deep.
A right and proper cleric, only he developed a habit of devouring men. He ate so many that he bloated like a drowned pig, then softened into sludge. So they stuck him in the Cathedral of the Deep, and they made him a Lord of Cinder, not for virtue, but for might.
Aldrich was this simple saint who became a hugely powerful being, eventually chosen, maybe willingly and maybe not, to become a Lord of Cinder and link the fire. The Deacon's skirt tells us that the deacons tended to the flame, and I'm perhaps inclined to believe that this meant that maybe they were tending to the flame of Aldrich when he was a Lord of Cinder. And whether this is true or not, we do know that the deacons eventually succumbed to the horrors of the deep, and neither tending to the flame nor the faith could save them.
I love this room so much.
That many deacons cast Dark Soul sorceries, which were imparted to them by Archdeacon MacDonald, an adherent of Aldrich who was largely responsible for the corruption of the deacons. Archdeacon MacDonald delighted in the cathedral's stagnating souls. For him, they represented the glorious bedrock of this world. Under the guidance of Archdeacon MacDonald, these deacons became both clergymen and sorcerers. The Archdeacon's sin, as it's called, was to channel faith for sorcery, which transformed his staff from a symbol of religious authority into a catalyst of dark sorceries. The deacons, they still had faith, but it was not in fire any longer. It was in Aldrich, Saint of the Deep, their master. Upon his resurrection, Aldrich, like many Lords of Cinder, ruminated on the fading of the fire. For him, it inspired visions. He saw beyond the age of fire to the age of deep waters, and the coming age of the deep sea. Filled with new purpose, he knew what he had to do. He would devour the gods himself. When we get to the Deacons of the Deep, we expect to find Aldrich in his coffin, but he's already left for his home in the Beautiful Valley.
What the fuck?
The deacons here are led by Archdeacon Royce, who is one of the 3 archdeacons who remained behind to keep eternal watch over his master's coffin, hoping that one day he would return. Aldrich left a small doll in his coffin that Pontiff Sullivan gave to his most valued subjects. Wherever you
Go back to doing free camera. It takes me out of it.
Wherever you may be, Irithyll is your home.
Dude.
Archdeacon MacDonald went with him. We come across MacDonald in the depths of Anor Londo, and MacDonald, like many other deacons, is obese. He's huge, and I see that as a legacy of Aldrich, who derived power from gluttony. They're clearly mimicking him. In Anor Londo, Archdeacon MacDonald came to lead the Aldrich faithful.
Oh, what?
Who are defenders who exist to ensure that Aldrich, devourer of gods, remains undisturbed.
I never saw this. I completely missed this. I didn't see this in my game. There's an Archdeacon Covenant. That's where Archdeacon MacDonald is. Oh, that's really, really interesting. Dude, Aldrich is insane. It was cool to get like more of a visual on the boss and actually analyze that and see it as he's consuming Gwyndolin. But that's so bizarre. This is really interesting because this is like these are Pontiff's dogs. Look at that, is disgusting. Huh. So this is in the depths of Anor Londo. I'm gonna have to check this place out and find this because I have not seen this myself.
Archdeacon MacDonald went with him.
What the hell is...
We come across MacDonald.
It's alive!
Van Orlando. And MacDonald, like many other deacons, is obese. He's huge. And I see that as a legacy of Aldrich, who derived power from gluttony. They're clearly mimicking him. In Anne Orlando, Archdeacon MacDonald came to lead the Aldrich faithful, who are defenders, who exist to ensure that Aldrich, devourer of gods, remains undisturbed. And when we come across Aldrich, we realize why he wants to be undisturbed. Because Pontiff Sullivan, with a devourer of gods by his side, has imprisoned a god of the old royalty in the abandoned cathedral to be fed to the devourer. Gwyndolin, son of Gwyn and prior leader of the Dark Moon Knights, was gradually devoured by Aldrich. As Aldrich slowly devoured the god of the Dark Moon, he dreamt. In this dream, he saw the form of a young, pale girl in hiding, and we know this is Yorshka, who was sister to Gwyndolin, and a half-breed who is parallel to Priscilla from Dark Souls 1. But the interesting thing about this is the dream that Aldrich had, because apparently Aldrich only needs to dream about someone to learn their skills. For he uses Priscilla's life hunt scythe in battle. And this fact that he can learn things through his visions has some interesting implications, because Aldrich is clearly wielding a Gravelord Greatsword upon the end of his spear.
Yeah, it does look like the skirt here is very reminiscent of like Gravelord Nito. I was going to point that out before with like the skulls in there. So it's just such a weird amalgamation of like Dark Souls bosses in one fight. It's really cool.
Which lends credit towards this theory that Aldrich has devoured Nito in some capacity, and he is called the Devourer of Gods, plural, after all. So another question becomes, did Aldrich also devour Nito? Well, he has the wispy Nito-like cloak with skulls within it, but I think it's more likely that these skulls are just remnants of other humans that he's devoured. You have to remember there is no concrete evidence that he has devoured Nito, and I personally think it's more likely that he simply dreamt up the Gravelord spell in a similar manner to which he dreamt up the Life Hunt scythe from Yorshka.
Okay.
But what you think shapes the story here, so...
What you think shapes the story.
All of the Pontiff's lackeys explained for the most part, and the biggest unanswered questions here to go into in other videos is what exactly the relationship between Sullivan and the deacons is, and in what order this story of corruption and treachery played out, because timeline is always one of the hardest things to get right in the Souls series. But the biggest curiosity, in my opinion,
time is convoluted.
Really interests me are Aldrich's visions of the age of the deep sea. From a being, remember, that has visions...
Irithyll is so gorgeous, guys. Irithyll is so gorgeous.
So, in a franchise that's entirely self-contained within this age of fire and its cycles, this vision of the deep sea, it's pretty much the only mention of a different future. And its appearance in these descriptions feels so out of place that I almost expect it to be referenced in the future in some capacity. Assuming it's not just a reference to Bloodborne, maybe this indicates what Miyazaki is doing next on one of his projects, or maybe we'll see something related to this in the DLC. Moving on. Something set Sullivan down this path. When Sullivan was a young sorcerer, he discovered the profaned capital, and down there he discovered an unfading flame below a distant tundra of Irithyll, and when he found this, a burning ambition took root within him. The profaned flame. The origins of it aren't known, but we do know a few things. We know it's an unfading flame, we know that it can be manipulated, and we know that it swallows the hearts of those who wield it.
I love that
Pontiff
thing.
himself imbued his greatsword with this fire, and he also gave it to his holy knights. Shortly after he did this, the fire witches had their hearts swallowed by the flame. And as one last example of its corrupting influence, the handmaidens who wield it down in the profaned capital, their dagger says that they take pleasure in wounding others, and of course, the Pontiff himself doesn't exactly have a very good moral compass. But apart from that, we know precious little about the Profaned Flame, and this has been the hardest part of the script to write for me, because the Profaned Flame defies all categorization as flames that have existed previously in the series. So I'm going to work on my theories on it, and while I'm doing that, I'll list those theories in the description, because I could talk about this thing for a very long time without actually getting anywhere. The final thing, and maybe the most important thing we know about the Profaned Flame, is that Yhorm the Giant became a Lord of Cinder to put it to rest. Now, clearly, Yhorm was not successful, because the Profaned Flame has infiltrated almost all of Irithyll and set a lot of events in motion. This just adds even more tragedy to Yhorm's tale.
Yhorm, my friend.
He was the descendant of an ancient conqueror, and was asked by the very people once subjugated to lead them, serving as both a weighty blade and a stone-hard shield. Yhorm fought unflinchingly as a one-man vanguard, but one day he lost the one he wished to protect. In response, he threw down his great shield and added a left-handed notch to his machete instead, so he could two-hand it, for he no longer had anything left to protect. All the while, his human subjects appeared quite disrespectful of him. They were insincere when they called him a lord, and they doubted him. He is called Lonely Yhorm in his cinders, and perhaps that's because he lost the one he wished to protect, or perhaps because he didn't have the love of his people. At some point, the Profaned Flame became a real problem in the capital, for according to his cinders, Yhorm decided to sacrifice himself and become a Lord of Cinder to put the Profaned Flame to rest. I don't know why Yhorm decided that, hey, I'm gonna put out fire with fire, because when he did this, fire rained down from the sky and incinerated naught but human flesh. This is an interesting insight into who the linking of the fire consumes. It consumed humans, and humans alone, and you see their disfigured, smelted corpses all around Yhorm's chamber. Before he linked the fire, however, Yhorm left behind two storm rulers, which was a legendary greatsword, also known as the Giantslayer, for the residual strength of storm that brings giants to their knees. So this thing could kill giants, and one he gave to the humans who doubted him. He called them out on their cowardly words and gave them a weapon capable of killing him. And the other,
So cool to see it actually getting used.
a friend in return for a promise. This dear friend was Sigurd, who journeys to the profaned capital in order to uphold his promise and slay his old friend. Presumably, Yhorm asked Sigurd to kill him if he ever betrayed his duty, and Sigurd does so, seeing that Yhorm has not returned to link the fire once again. The profaned capital also had its sorcerers, who claimed heirship to the legacy of the renowned scholar Big Hat Logan, even going so far as to emulate the type of staff he used.
Old Big Hat.
Across the world, I know of two crystal sages who emulated him even more closely. These crystal sages served as spiritual guides to the scholars of Lothric's grand archives, and one of them went on to ally with the Undead Legion. The Undead Legion of Farron was a caravan of undead, dedicated to the eradication of the Abyss wherever it was found. The Abyss Watchers, as they were called, follow the duty and the form of the Wolf Knight of Dark Souls 1, known as Artorias the Abyss Walker. They are
Artorias.
essentially his legacy. They made their home in Farron Keep, and high above Farron Keep lies an emaciated old wolf. The Abyss Watchers, for their hunting of the Abyss, they required some art that went beyond any existing art. Wolf's Blood, the legacy of Artorias, provided just that. Their pointed steel helm became shirked as this sinister omen by the masses, because, think about it, if you saw that pointed steel helmet coming towards your kingdom, you knew you were in trouble, because these guys are dedicated to taking out the Abyss. And indeed, their home in Farron might just be set above such a kingdom, for below are the Catacombs of Karthus, and sealed within a goblet, deep below in the Catacombs, is the encounter with High Lord Wolnir, a ruler who succumbed to the Abyss. Before succumbing to the Abyss, Wolnir was a conqueror. He ruled over the people of Carthus of the Sands, formidable warriors who were masters of the curved sword, and also of pyromancies that enhanced the effectiveness of their curved swords. The swordsmen attached great value to victory at all costs, for where was the honor in death?
Carthus is such an interesting location to me, because as soon as when we were going into Catacombs of Carthus for the first time, I was like, oh my god, is there going to be like some really cool looking like desert area that we end up going into that will be like a lot of fun to check out, like, because like, I was reading, you read the lore for Carthus itself as a location. And I just thought that would have been really cool. Ultimately, we know that we did not get a location like that, but I still think it's very interesting. Instead, we got the Catacombs once again. We got our lovely similar Catacombs from Dark Souls 1, but it was cool. I just kind of would have loved to see. Because it was, I guess, the sunken city of Carthus or something along those lines, and I just thought that was really, really neat, as like a visual. But yeah, definitely something I would have loved like a follow up on.
They lived for their High Lord Wolnir, who was conqueror of most lands known to their people, and yeah, you can see why they loved him. In Wolnir's time, there were other lords who had their crowns rightfully bequeathed upon them, but Wolnir brought them to their knees and ground their crowns to dust, forming his own crown from theirs, for he was the one High Lord, keen to outlive all others.
Look at this design. This is insane. I never noticed this before because obviously I was too busy running away from his big head and his massive arms, but that is really, really cool. I wonder who, like, goddamn, like, yeah, I'm just wearing skulls of all my previous victims, probably.
Reminds me a lot of what we did in Dark Souls 2. Anyway, somehow, Wolnir himself fell to the abyss, and he was gripped by this fear of true darkness, and he pleaded to the gods for the first time. In our boss fight with him, there is a darkness below Wolnir, and it's struggling to consume him. But Wolnir had his holy sword, and he had 3 armlets which he had stripped from the corpses of clerics, and these things gave him some semblance of comfort. Of course, we destroy the bracelets, and the abyss finally consumes him. While he was in the
That's
abyss,
insane.
Wolnir was not inactive. Black Serpent is this pyromancy that was discovered from the abyss by Wolnir, which went on to inspire the black arts of his Grave Wardens. The Grave Warden pyromancy tome was developed by his Grave Wardens who discovered his pyromancies. And going back up for a second, Wolnir and the Abyss, their proximity to the Abyss Watchers probably isn't coincidence. In fact, it makes quite a lot of sense for Carthus to be one of the kingdoms that the Abyss Watchers toppled. So let's go back up to the Abyss Watchers for a second and see if this theory holds any weight. Eventually, the Abyss Watchers became Lords of Cinder. Their shed wolf's blood served their mandate as lords. Essentially, it met the requirements. To gain access to the Abyss Watchers, you have to extinguish 3 flames, and I always wondered why this ritual existed. It felt very video gamey and out of place, but I went through once more recently, and I looked really closely at the engravings behind each flame.
Oh wow, they're all different.
The 4 kings, one looks like Nito, and one looks like the Bed of Chaos.
Oh, that's so cool.
These were the souls you had to collect to gain access to Gwyn and open a giant stone door.
Ow.
So these are likely here to symbolize that, right? We're extinguishing 3 flames and we're opening the door that explains the ritual.
That's really cool.
A piece of trivia than anything.
Love that.
After the Legion's Watchers became Lords of Cinder, the wolf blood dried up, and Farron was consumed by a festering wood. Dark raids began to roam, the keep fell to ruins, and as suggested by many of you in my lore through, the Abyss Watchers, upon being resurrected to link the fire once more, may have been affected by the Abyss as well. So here's the theory. The Abyss Watchers were driven to seek out the Abyss, right? Well, what if, upon their resurrection, The abyss far below in the Catacombs of Carthus crept into the Abyss Watchers themselves. This would explain why the Abyss Watchers are locked into endless combat with themselves, because they're driven to seek out the Abyss, but they also can't die, so they're locked into endless combat. When I
Damn.
read this theory in the comments, something else clicked as well. The Wolf Knight armor, which belonged to Artorias, who fell to the Abyss, says that the armor of the Abyss Watchers suggests their own eventual end. So the game is drawing a parallel here between Artorias and the Abyss Watchers. It's saying that the armor of the Abyss Watchers shows that they're falling to the Abyss as well. And here's the really interesting thing. When you look closely at their armor, you realize it has black tendrils of the Abyss rising up.
Yeah.
The armor is showing us that they fell to the Abyss. Probably. This theory isn't concrete, and no one should take it as such, but I think it's the best explanation for their infighting. It's my favorite explanation, anyway.
Yeah, that's really neat
Mostly
detailing.
This one was all you guys, so thank you. Onwards to Lothric. The Knights of Lothric were hunters of dragons, explaining their affinity with lightning and why they worshipped the sun. They have since tamed dragons, and with their drakes, they once crushed anything that threatened their shores. The knight has served as one of the 3 pillars of Lothric since ancient times, and it shares place alongside the wyverns as a symbol of Lothric. However, tales of Dragonslayers are now a rare thing, and they're told only in fragments and whispers in remote regions. The Dragonslayer armor lost its master long ago, but it still remembers the sporting hunts they shared together.
Yeah, this is such an interesting
When you
fight.
fight against it, the armor retains its master's fighting style, but now it has a new master.
The Pilgrim Butterfly.
Butterfly.
Yeah, this is
Now,
so
the
crazy.
Dragonslayer armor is the only mention of these butterfly creatures.
Oh, wow.
Speculation abounds whenever you talk about them. When you look up at them closely, though, closer than the game intends you to ever get, you'll see that they're flesh and bone, and they're almost bent backwards with a ribcage jutting outwards.
Oh my god.
Their name is one of the biggest clues that we have, and the word pilgrim makes me think of the pilgrims of Londor, who all died on their way to the peak of Lothric. And just like these pilgrim butterflies fly upwards to the peak of Lothric as well. And in both these cases, with the pilgrims and the pilgrim butterflies, we have no real idea why either of them are going up. So perhaps we'll learn more if we ever get Londor-themed DLC, and I think that's pretty likely. I'm going to list 2 other theories in the description about the butterflies, because the bottom line is we don't know what they are.
That's crazy.
The archives, and beyond the archives,
Because they interest me so much, so I was actually hoping for some answers on that.
curiously, these are the only Lords of Cinder who were not featured in the opening cutscene of Lords being resurrected, and I believe that's because they never linked the fire. And I think their rejection of linking the fire might have been what set all of the desperate resurrections into motion. This is just a theory, but I think it's backed up by most of these descriptions and this dialogue.
This boss fight's so wild.
Is in your hands. Please save his soul. Tell him what he must be, a lord.
So, there's Prince Lothric and Lorian, his brother. Lorian is the eldest, and before he was crippled, he was a knight who single-handedly slayed a demon prince, the victory eternally scorching his sword with flame. The Cinders of a Lord state that the Lothric bloodline was obsessed with creating a worthy heir. They needed someone to link the flame, and for some reason Prince Lorian did not suffice. So they put their faith in their next born, Prince Lothric, as his throne states, last hope of his line. Prince Lothric, destined to be a Lord of Cinder, was born into swaddling clothes used in ancient prayer, and they are all that he has ever worn. He was cherished by the royal family, despite being born into illness, a frail and shriveled child. He was their last hope, and meant to be a champion, but some things will remain distant dreams forever. Linking the fire proved impossible, so the family resorted to unspeakable means. Descriptions don't say or imply what these unspeakable means are, so that's up to us to guess at. But after mentioning these unspeakable means, the Cinder description goes on to say that the path to linking the fire is a cursed one indeed. So Prince Lothric was cursed. With what, we don't know, but Lorian embraced his brother's curse, leaving him mute and crippled. It is said that Lorian, the one who embraced the curse, did so willingly and embraced his fate. When we kill Lorian in the boss fight, Lothric resurrects him, saying, "For that is our curse." So maybe being unable to die itself is the fire-linking curse, and why he says,
You remain among the accursed.
After becoming one, the soul of the twin princes says that they rejected their duty to become lords of Cinder and settled down far, far away to watch the fire fade from a distance. The curse has made their souls nearly inseparable. So why did Lothric grow to despise and reject his duty as a lord of Cinder? Well, it's very likely due to a man named as the First of the Scholars. Soulstream says that he was alleged to be a private mentor of the royal prince, and that he doubted the linking of the fire. So it's very likely that this scholar was the one who made Lothric reject his fate as a Lord of Cinder. And there is so much more to the tale of Lothric, but we don't have time. I want to talk about the kingdom, about the royal family, but this video is only about the main bosses, so I still have to mention Osiris, King of Lothric, and his wife, the Queen, so please subscribe and look out for the optional bosses lore video. And the final main boss, the being we fight after the Firekeeper chastises the lords for going without thrones, is
Plin plin plon, round 2.
the Kiln of the First Flame.
So cool.
Cinder is actually a fairly easy being to explain. Ever since Lord Gwyn, the first Lord of Cinder, many exalted lords have linked the First Flame, and it is their very souls that have manifested themselves as defender of the flame. The soul of Cinder is their deific manifestation. More specifically, it's clear that the soul of Cinder is this conglomerate of players themselves, us from previous games and cycles who have linked the fire. Using the ninja flip ring from Dark Souls 1, curved swords, pyromancies, sorceries, miracles, and in Phase 2, the music shifts to this twisted tribute of Gwyn's theme as he takes on the First Lord's fighting style. The kiln also, it represents the state of the world if you look behind you. It's a city twisted and distorted and folded in on itself, just like the entire game and bosses we just journeyed through. Dark Souls 3 contains the histories, the people, and the lands of the Abyss Watcher's age, of the Pontiff and Aldrich's age, of Yorm's age, and the story of Lothric that literally seems to have called forth old lords of Cinder to link the fire once again.
Can you see how absolutely crazy it is that so much of this, which we now know is the Dreg Heap, like, so much of this is rendered. Like, he's taken the free camera through all of this. They're just like buildings that are actually shoved and clumped together. It's not like a fucking JPEG, at some point. It's not just fucking, let's just put really low poly textured stuff in the back, just hide it all behind a giant wall. He's going through all of this structure and flying up and around it. It's all fucking...
And the lands of the...
Look at this stuff.
Of the Pontiff and Aldrich's age, of Yorm's age.
Like, this is insane. Like, when you're all the way back here, it's not even like tucked away like low poly or whatever. It's all like fully rendered environments. That, like, Dark Souls 3 has such gorgeously detailed environments. Same with Bloodborne. Like, those two games are certainly just like my favorite in terms of environmental design. It's really cool to see it being explored in a free camera.
Seems to have called forth old lords of Cinder to link the fire once again.
Wild.
As you stand in front of the flame, 4 choices lay before you, more than any previous game. But that's a video and a story for another time, for this video is far, far too long already, and judging by my analytics for videos like this, only half of the people who started watching this video will still be watching now. So to you guys, thank you for sticking it through. This video took a really long time to make.
That's a really true statement about video analytics, let me tell you.
The major shout out in this video has to go to a guy who runs a YouTube channel named AGR Cactus. He taught me how to use a lot of these camera tricks, and this video would not look half as good if it wasn't for his guidance.
Cool.
He has this video called The Beauty of Lothric, which really shows off how beautiful this game is when you look at it from angles that the game developers didn't exactly expect us to look at it from. So do me a favor and check it out and subscribe to him.
You know what? I actually might.
We've been talking for about half an hour now, and I haven't covered nearly as much as I would have liked to have covered. So for that, we have the Lore Through series, which is dedicated to being really in-depth as we go through every single area in the game, and to bring out the characters and their stories and what their stories relate to, we have Prepare to Cry, and for everything else we have the Secrets videos. But next is a video just like this one, which gives you an overview of the optional bosses, and whether you're a patron or a viewer, thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.
So cool. That was so insanely cool. Very good insight into a lot of those bosses and what they're about and how they connect to other characters and how they connect to the areas and the area's history. Very, very cool stuff. Always massively impressed. I'll have to check out the Beauty of Lothric video sometime as well, but we will jump into the lore of the optional bosses now as well. It's funny that he's like, oh, this video is way too long, 34 minutes. And my videos that are like 2 to 3 hours sometimes, depending on what game is getting played, and I definitely feel that on the analytics side of things. It's a true fact. We're going to jump into lore of the lore of the optional bosses now, which looks to be very exciting because we'll get into the Nameless King and stuff like that. So I think Vaati will be addressing his speculation and his theories from the original Prepare to Cry series for Dark Souls 1 about Solaire being the potential unknown firstborn son, because it's now been replaced. So let's get into that now.
Lord Gwyn's firstborn son was a god of war, who inherited the sunlight from his father. The power of sunlight is manifest as lightning, and it's highly effective against dragons, and Gwyn's firstborn son was once a Dragonslayer who fought against his father's ancient enemy. And as you know, the ancient dragons once ruled over an age of grey, but Gwyn discovered their weakness and he struck them down with great bolts of lightning. Later, advancements in arms would lead to lightning-imbued spears with a cross pommel, which were developed to be stamped or thrust deep into the flesh of dragons.
That Dark Souls 1 cutscene is so good too.
The sword spear was the first of such weapons, for the Firstborn had respect only for arms and nothing else. At some point during the war, however, Gwyn's Firstborn had a change of heart. He switched sides and sacrificed everything to ally himself with the ancient dragons.
That was a really cool transition, dude. That was so cool. This transition is sick. Just like in this chamber.
Had a change of heart.
Oh man, the visual of that is so cool. Love that, switching to the different statues.
And unlike a lot of Souls lore, this part of history is actually described as missing for a reason. For after he sided with the ancient dragons, Lord Gwyn's Firstborn was expunged from the annals of history, and his deific status was rescinded. He was no longer considered
redacted.
No longer in the books of history, and
this is so cool.
His name is not known. If you played around the time that Dark Souls 1 was released, the identity of the Firstborn was a complete mystery to all of us. All we knew was that he was Gwyn's Firstborn, that he was a god of war, and that he was a core part of the Warriors of Sunlight. So players puzzled over missing statues next to Gwyn, they puzzled over broken monuments to the Warriors of Sunlight, and we even guessed that the Firstborn himself could have just been a simple man from Astora who fought for the sun. It's true that the god of war continued to watch over his Sunlight warriors, but we can now finally see where he went and why. The Nameless
So cool.
Firstborn son of Gwyn, heir of sunlight and god of war, left the miracle sunlight blade upon his father's coffin, perhaps as a final farewell. Now, this part of the Nameless King's history, it's been purposefully erased, but some players do think that traces of his existence still remain out in the world and cannot be erased. In fact, it's a popular theory, and I'll leave a link to a few sources in the description, that the Nameless King is referenced in the Faram armor set.
Yeah, that's interesting. I noticed that. This is the Dark Souls 2 armor.
Of Ferosa, worshippers of the war god Faram, wore heavy armor and were feared for their two-handed swordplay. This armor was blessed by the war god Faram. Ferosa would later fall to conflict with their neighbors, and the legacy of the Faram Knights fell with it, so the information here is also lacking. But is the Nameless King the war god Faram? Well, that's up to you to decide. Both are described as war gods, both place high value in arms. The Nameless King had to be king of some realm, and the Faram set is blessed and named after a god of war, who is possibly the one emblazoned upon the helm as a knight facing a dragon. Also, both the Nameless King and the Kingdom of...
Wow, what a detail!
So, hey, whatever you believe, this is...
What a detail on the helmet. God, I love the absolute meticulous detail on armor sets sometimes, and sigils and emblems, and like all the details in the world down to the finest point of something that is very rarely seen. That is so cool. Personally, I don't think that the God of War, Faram, and the Nameless King are one and the same. I would have expected there to be some sort of Gwyn in the name, at least. We've got Gwyn and Gwyndolin and Guinevere, that there would be another variation of that name. Gwyn Jr. we call him. Good old Gwyn Jr. for Gwyn Sr.
This classic example of souls leaving just enough clues that you can choose to believe or not choose to believe, so no one is provably right or wrong here. But moving on to what we do know. The Nameless King tamed a storm drake, upon which he led a lifetime of battle. Assumedly, this partnership with the storm drake was a part of the Firstborn allying with the ancient dragons. I have a few suspicions that the storm drake might also be known as a giant horned Oni, which are found in eastern lands, as the Oni Slayer Great Arrow describes. And it's the only creature in the game that really fits the description of an Oni, whatever creature that is, and it's certainly a drake that looks very much like a foreign offshoot of most other draconid creatures in Souls.
That's true, actually.
I like them, really.
It's very unique.
They are also found in an eastern land, and Ferosa is in an eastern land as well, so maybe there's something here, but just speculation.
Good speculation.
When the storm drake fell, the king claimed its soul, as was customary in the Age of the Gods. In a giant flash, we see the Nameless King become imbued with the drake's power of the storm, which is really reminiscent of Ornstein and Smo, absorbing one another in their boss fight in Dark Souls 1.
I really like the detail. This has actually been pointed out before, but it's cool to actually see it, that he does have that hand of he does have the handshake, like the hesitation, before he like takes the power of, like, you know, his steed, his mount, and imbues it into his sword.
As the Age of the Gods was drawing to a close there. Dark Souls 3's description of Smo's great hammer tells us that Smo was the last knight to remain at his post, guarding the ruined cathedral. Ornstein, on the other hand, he long guarded the ruined cathedral, but he left the land in search of the Nameless King. So you're probably asking yourself, how did Ornstein leave the cathedral if I killed him in Dark Souls 1 and then again in Dark Souls 2? Well, remember, Dark Souls 3 is the game that very openly references the fact that events are doomed to repeat themselves. More than any previous game, this is a game about cycles, and the Lords of Cinder who contributed to their own cycle. We see so many cycles laid before us, so yes, a lot of narratives and plots in the game have been recycled. In a way, that's what the games are about, but In Dark Souls 3, it's nice because a lot of these plots are further along than ever before. Take Ornstein, for example. In this timeline, he survived until he tired of standing around in a cathedral, and he left.
Don't we have sort of that general consensus that Ornstein from Dark Souls 1 was an illusion of Gwyndolin, and Smo was, I don't know, but like, I thought that, personally, I was under the assumption or thinking that it was an illusion, you know, of him being there, and he'd already left long before that previously, you know? But I guess, you know, again, it's all speculation and up for interpretation of how you would feel you want the story to go. I would have assumed that in Dark Souls 2 that it was, if anything, more of a, you know, not necessarily Ornstein himself, but like the old Dragonslayer could have been like, you know, a soul permeating the armor, you know, sort of thing. Like, you know, timelines are convoluted. We don't even know where Dark Souls 2 is really set, because Dark Souls 2 is kind of like the outlier to Dark Souls 1 and 3, is that it's not anywhere near as connected. Dark Souls 3 does have the earthen peak in the Dreg Heap DLC, however, so, you know, they kind of blended that in there.
For during this dragonless age where he stood in the cathedral, Ornstein the Dragonslayer must have felt quite bereft of purpose, so he left in search of the Nameless King. So the question becomes, did he intend to kill the Nameless King, or did he intend to serve him? Ornstein's set in Dark Souls 1 describes Ornstein as the captain of the 4 knights of Lord Gwyn, but the Leo Ring of Dark Souls 3 describes him as the first knight of the sun's eldest born, the Nameless King. So, since I find it hard to believe that he could be both the captain of the guard to Gwyn and simultaneously the first knight of the Firstborn, I think it's most likely that Ornstein abandoned his duty as captain of the guard and then decided to serve the Nameless King instead, after he was exiled. But the best evidence that Ornstein remained a friend to the Nameless King is the Sacred Oath description, which labels him as not just the Nameless King's first knight, but his faithful first knight. Since the game is clarifying something like this, then I'm going to believe that he is loyal to the Nameless King. So,
despite being the Dragonslayer,
pledges allegiance to the Nameless King. But what becomes of Ornstein after his arrival in Archdragon Peak? We find his armor and his weapon after the Nameless King fight, but it's just discarded to the side. It's not upon a corpse, it's not in a chest, and this is strange for Souls, right? It stands out. I don't think there's many examples of this happening. So sure, it wouldn't make sense for the armor to be upon a corpse, but items like this are at least meant to be in chests. So, to me, it signifies that Ornstein didn't want to preserve anything at all from his past.
Took the path of the dragon.
He discarded his armor in the same way that many people here do, to begin the transformation into a dragon. So, is Ornstein alive? Is he dead? Was he killed by the Nameless King? Or did he become one of the dragons in the shrine? His fate is left open for you to decide. So we've mentioned the spell Sacred Oath before, and its description reads, Sacred Oath, a miracle devised by warriors of the sun, tells the tale of the sun's firstborn, his faithful first knight, and the brave Dragonslayer who served them both. The brave Dragonslayer who served them both. So a few Dragonslayers could fit this description, but I think it's most likely that this was Havel.
Havel also being here.
Was a battlefield compatriot of Gwyn, the First Lord. He was suited in this armor, carved from solid rock, and he wields the tooth of an everlasting dragon. Havel was followed by warriors who replicated his armaments and his weaponry and never flinched nor retreated from battle. Havel was the arch-enemy of Seath, the Scaleless, which was the dragon who betrayed his own and allied with Lord Gwyn. This must have placed Havel in an awkward spot. he's a battlefield compatriot of Lord Gwyn, and yet Gwyn allied with a magic-wielding, traitorous dragon that Havel hates. In Dark Souls 1, it's implied that Havel was locked away by a dear friend, and all that time ago, we theorized that it was Gwyn himself who locked his hollowed friend away. We also talked about how a piece of occult weaponry was capable of killing the gods, and it was locked away in a basement with
Havel's gear. Yeah.
This fueled some theory that Havel plotted against the gods. In Lordran, Havel remained locked in that basement, but in Dark Souls 3, perhaps we see a different path to Havel's tale. We find armaments left by Havel himself in Archdragon Peak, and we can easily theorize that Havel was the Dragonslayer mentioned in the Tale of Sacred Oath. A brave Dragonslayer, the keyword being brave, who never flinched or retreated from battle, and had good cause to take up arms with the Nameless King, who was another leader positioned to rebel against Gwyn and Seath the Scaleless. Of course, to play devil's advocate, Havel could also be there to slay the Nameless King. He is overlooking the corpse of an ancient dragon, after all, but as a final piece of proof that he's on the Nameless King's side, the half-dragon summoners, the ones with the frilly necks that summon phantoms to fight against you, they summon warriors of Havel to fight.
Oh, I've never experienced that.
A half-naked dude wielding Ricard's rapier.
This guy we've fought.
Crown. So I'm assuming this is Ricard as well, and it links Prince Ricard to a king, it links him to the Way of the Dragon, and it links him to yet another castle full of half-dragon snake creatures. So that is pretty much everything surrounding the Nameless King explained. So what do you believe? The story is really open-ended, and I've given you most of the raw information you need to tell your own story. But regardless, now you know the story of Archdragon Peak, where the son of Gwyn switched sides, separated himself from the fire-linking fiasco, and assumedly quietly began rebuilding the ranks of the ancient dragons. So we just talked about how Havel hated a dragon named Seath the Scaleless, a traitorous, mad pale drake whose twisted soul clearly lives on in Osiris, the consumed king. Osiris,
yes, right,
of Lothric, married to a queen who was revered as a goddess of fertility and bounty, much like Guinevere from Dark Souls 1, and as we know from the previous video, the Lothric line was obsessed with creating a worthy heir, and the right of the linking of the fire. Osiris, however, in his later years, became fascinated with dragons. His research led him to the heretics of the Grand Archives of Lothric.
This is such an interesting boss fight.
Twisted worship of Seath, the Pale Drake.
An interesting character.
Eventually, he discovered the research that was done by Big Hat Logan, who you'll remember from Dark Souls 1. He was this legendary scholar who went mad delving into Seath's sorceries. So Osiris was inspired, he was edified by Big Hat Logan, and he even learnt how to perform the crystal breath of Seath the Scaleless. He was transforming into this dragon, he was changing, and behind Osiris we see the rest of his chambers, and they're full of dragon scales and dead man serpents, and there's even a Drakeblood Knight in the Way of the Dragon pose. Osiris himself was clearly somewhat successful at turning into an ancient dragon, and given his admiration for Seath, it seems that he took on Seath's soul aspects. Osiris became this blind, mutated pale drake just like Seath, and he was obsessed with this notion that he could use his royal blood for a, and I quote, greater purpose. So he fathered this crossbreed child with his queen and named him Ocelot. After giving birth to Ocelot, her youngest child, the Queen of Lothric quietly disappeared. Let's talk about the Queen a little bit. This Queen either takes after Guinevere, or is Guinevere, because in Dark Souls 1, Guinevere left the ailing land of Lordran
to be with the flame god Flan.
In the manner that this Queen leaves the ailing land of Lothric. Also, Guinevere of Dark Souls 1 also pushes the chosen undead to link the fire, And in Dark Souls 3, the Queen of Lothric is obsessed with finding people to link the fire, even placing powerful rings in the untended graves in the hope that one day an unkindled would rise to link the fire.
So, well, Guinevere is an illusion to link the fire, so it's not like Guinevere is actually being like, hey, go and do this. It's an illusion telling us to, hey, go and do this. Get out of my illusion, Anor Londo, you know? Because Guinevere left Anor Londo to go be with Flame God Flann. Interesting that there's no mention of that there. Instead, she left to go and have a dragon child with Osiris. Weird.
So the parallels between these two are undeniable. And with the flame fading in Dark Souls 3 and this pus of man spreading across the castle, the Grand Archives, where Osiris learnt all of his knowledge, closed its doors for good, and Osiris remained, walled off behind this garden, clutching his dragon crossbreed Ocelot. Many assassins were dispatched to his domain, but none returned. We learn that the consumed king ascribed his resilience to the divine protection of the dragon scale. And when we stumble through the consumed garden, we find this pale drake cradling his invisible infant crossbreed before the fight.
Yeah.
He's a very vocal boss, which is rare, and I think we need to dissect every line of his dialogue.
Vocal bosses are so good. I love vocal bosses.
Slaves, finally taken notice, have you,
It's so cool.
of the power of my beloved Ocelot, child of dragons? Well, I will not give him up, for he is all that I have.
Like, think about how many bosses that we've fought in, like, Dark Souls and stuff. How cool it is when they speak to you, and even in Bloodborne, like when Father Gascoigne speaks to you, and it's just like the stuff that he's saying is so cool. Especially with like humanoid type fights and enemies, it just makes you wish that they spoke to you more. Like, what would particular enemies have to say to you if they could speak? What would Pontiff Sullivan say to you if he could speak? You know, stuff like that.
So first off, he calls us ignorant slaves, and I think this means that he's arrogant and he sees his subjects as slaves, or perhaps he's referring to us being slaves to the linking of the fire, which Lothric is known for. Then he says, finally taken notice, have you? Which explains how he hasn't been disturbed for a very long time. He is out of the way, he's not a main boss, and he's also behind this fair line of defense and within a locked-off castle. We know it's been a long time because the main boss we fight in this area also gives us that impression. Osiris believes that this crossbreed child named Ocelot is worth taking notice of, but is he really? Ocelot is the crying baby in the boss fight, and if we could see it, we would probably see that it's a crossbreed between a dragon and the royal bloodline, and crossbreeds of this type have existed in the past. 3 others we know of are the Emerald Herald, Yorshka, locked up in the tower, and most notably Priscilla from Dark Souls 1. All that time ago in Dark Souls 1, we theorized that Priscilla was a crossbreed between a lord and a dragon. Specifically, a lot of people said that she was the offspring of Seath, the Scaleless, and Guinevere. And that parentage is really strongly mirrored here between Osiris and his queen, who's basically Guinevere.
Apparently Guinevere just sleeping with everybody and having babies with everyone.
Invisible.
Flame God Flann, no, never heard of him. He's invisible.
Cradling cannot be seen. And if Osiris is blind, like Seath was, then perhaps he's not even aware that his child is invisible.
True.
Priscilla also had this ability called Life Hunt, which apparently the gods feared. Presumably, Life Hunt, though it is never properly described, can harm the gods, and maybe the threat of this was what made the Queen of Lothric leave her home this time around. Because it is easy to believe that Osiris would turn against his own kingdom. After all, Seath's soul line, as I'm calling it, they've all been betrayers. Seath betrayed the ancient dragons, The Duke of the Writhing Ruins in Dark Souls 2
Dark Souls 2,
spiders
yeah.
upon the townsfolk, and I think it's most likely
Duke's
that
dear Freya.
Osiris hoped that this crossbreed child would be this powerful weapon with Life Hunt, based on how he talks about it during the fight. However, this crossbreed didn't turn out as Osiris hoped, clearly, and Osiris's plan, maybe not such a great one. He is always referenced as deluded and mad.
Ah, dear little Ocelot, where have you gone? Are you hiding from me? Come out. Come out. Don't be afraid. You were born a child of dragons. What could you possibly fear? Now, show yourself, Ocelot. My dear little Ocelot.
Imagine a second phase, you get like Cyrus down to a certain point, and then Ocelot comes in. There's like a secondary dragon type boss, similar like in like a moveset, like Priscilla or something, like comes in. Because like I'm gonna make this little observation that's just come to mind now, is Priscilla could go invisible and was a crossbreed dragon. Priscilla weakness feet, you know. So potentially that's what Ocelot is doing here, is maybe crossbreed dragons somehow, I guess, depending on who they're tied to, might retain some sort of genetic ability or inherent ability to turn invisible at will or something like that. But, you know, Priscilla could go invisible, so I mean, it could totally be a thing. Like in the crystal cave in Dark Souls 1, where Seath the Scaleless is located, to even get there, you have to cross these invisible barriers. To get to Yorshka in Dark Souls 3, you also have to cross an invisible bridge. You have to, like Crystal Cave and in Dark Souls 3, invisible bridges to get to them, you know? And they're all tied to being, like, to the dragons or to being, like, a crossbreed. So I think that's a very interesting point of observation that I could make there, is invisibility is something that we have seen in terms of, you know, the dragons and crossbreed and stuff like that. So it's come up a few times now. It's not just like a one-off thing.
Originally, Osiris resembles a father fighting to protect his child, but as he nears death, he seems to become...
I also have the power
with his
of the crossbreed dragons in my invisible water bottle. Here you go.
He appears even to smash this baby who's cradling upon the ground, and he reverts to a more feral stage as he fights for his life against us. The baby, however, it continues to cry even after this, so yeah, maybe it's still alive. So, what are the consequences of Osiris's treachery? Well, the collapse of his rule was probably this fair part of the collapse of the castle, and even of Lothric Kingdom. Plus, the passive man is concentrated a lot in his garden, but apart from that, like the Nameless King, I can't see that his decisions had this huge impact upon the world. In the previous video, we talked about how the Lothric bloodline resorted to unspeakable means to find a worthy heir to link the fire, and my last thoughts on this boss are that perhaps Ocelot was created with similar intent to Shanalot, the dragon crossbreed of Dark Souls 2 that men hoped would ward off the fire-linking curse. What's unclear is whether Osiris also fathered Lorian and Lothric, who are the two children of the royal bloodline who refused to link the fire. Lorian, the eldest, he was raised as a knight, and before
why is he on this
his
bridge?
curse crippled him, he was famed for single-handedly slaying the demon prince.
Why is he
leaving
outside?
His sword eternally scorched with fire. I'd wager that this demon prince is probably related to the old demon king, if only because they're the only hints of demon royalty that we've ever seen in the game.
until the DLC, because you actually fight demon princes. I know that this video was before the DLC came out, so it's going to be interesting to watch Vaati's videos on the Dark Souls 3 DLCs, because we'll get updated information. It's going to be very cool, because then I get to get awesome lore information on Ariandel and all of that stuff. Very excited for that.
And if these two are related, then maybe the arena that you fight the old Demon King in is also related. There are piles of dead Demon Kin corpses, which signifies that some battle took place here. And of all these demons, the shriveled old Demon King is the only one to remain. Now, like a clump of burnt ash, he's the last living witness of the chaos of Izalith. The Chaos Flame of Izalith was born when the Witch of Izalith attempted to use her own soul to create another First Flame. Instead, she turned into this tumultuous bed of chaos which birthed demons from the fire, beings that bore the smouldering essence of the Chaos Flame and were doomed eventually to perish.
Such a weird boss fight.
Hammer
So strange.
survived since old Izalith and is imbued with remnants of the Chaos Flame. We've talked about the Chaos Flame so much over the years, and in Dark Souls 3 we definitely see when it and demonkind are at their lowest point. Stray demons, Capra demons, Taurus demons, and even hidden centipede demons, they're all dead in this arena, and one stray demon we do face out in the world even has a trace of flame, showing...
I did not notice that there was the centipede demon in Old Demon King's arena too. That's really neat. That's cool detail. Did not even see that one.
how core this flame is to their survival. So the demon race and the Chaos Flame, it's demonstrably at its lowest point in the series. All of this said, demons are a largely undeveloped part of the lore, and I really do wish that they were designed to be more than just brutish enemies, you know? With the old Demon King, though, I liked it at the end of the fight. You might not have noticed, but if you keep him alive at around 10% health, he, in this desperate attempt to fend us off with one final effort, he releases all of his remaining energy. He fails, and then he stays panting on the ground indefinitely, unable even to lift his great hammer, and surrounded by the corpses of his kind, and he's the last piece of his race, just reduced to flimsily batting us away with one hand. That kind of scene where there's no cutscene, there's no break in the gameplay, and it still shows, you know, an emotion, a feeling that it wants to convey, that's good game design, and I feel like it's lost on a lot of people because most people will just finish this guy off in that last 10% of his health, but it's a powerful scene.
That's really cool.
The curse-rotted Greatwood, rooted in the Undead Settlement. The Undead Settlement is a home to many undead, and it's
Go for the balls!
who are dedicated to the dissection and the burial of themselves. Because it makes sense that in this village and refuge full to the brim with undead, that the primary task would end up being, you know, what do we do with all the bodies that keep rising from the grave? There's just this sheer problem of overpopulation, which could never be properly reduced because they never die. And as a result, in this place, you find undead caged together, dissected, hung, and buried, but probably just rising from
Oh
the
my
dead
god,
all the
yeah.
same to begin the process over again. Eventually, teachers from the Cathedral of the Deep came to take advantage of this climate in the undead settlement. The evangelists, all women, came to enlighten inhabitants of the undead settlement and sent carriers on the path to sacrifice, most likely to the Cathedral of the Deep, where they would be consumed by Aldrich as a sacrifice. So, given this, it's no surprise really that all manner of curses managed to seep into the undead settlement, for undead were being dissected, their bones were being ground to dust, and they were buried within the earth. Rooted within that same soil, that same earth, was a spirit tree that would become known as the curse-rotted Greatwood. Spirit trees are another really
Disgusting.
part of Souls lore, and they appear mostly in item descriptions from Dark Souls 2. it's really easy to skip any description of a spirit tree. So let's talk about what we know. They're described as magical, sentient, and supposedly possessing divine powers. 2 descriptions in particular reference them as appearing in a dream world related to Quella, who is the goddess of dream. There was this one talking spirit tree that also turned itself into a shield to protect a small, frightened child. I also have a hunch that this green tree that repairs items in Dark Souls 2 in the Sunken Kingdom, I think it could be another type of spirit tree as well. But again, this is just an educated guess. There's not these creatures.
That's a really cool link.
At any rate, the worst of the curses in the undead settlement were sealed away inside this spirit tree. Maybe it happened naturally, or maybe the townsfolk hoped that the tree would purify said curses, but eventually, however, the curses took their toll and festered in the belly of the Greatwood. So let's talk about what we find in the belly of the Greatwood. One thing we find is the Transposing Kiln, which is this artifact from Coreland with crystal lizard hide.
True.
Before I was a Lord of Cinder, I was a student of transposition, the process of extracting and coalescing the essence of a soul. A forbidden art that once left a foul stain upon Corland's honour. 'Tis an art that grants powers once thought unattainable. Most transposing kilns were lost with Corland, but this place is a crossing for all manner of cursed objects.
Unwanted, cursed items were what was sealed within the Greatwood, so it makes a degree of sense that the forbidden Transposing Kiln would also be sealed within it at some point. And with Ludleth's help, this kiln allows souls to be turned into a form we can use, like a weapon or a ring. These items reflect the souls that they were transposed from, and give us more insight into that being. Ludleth himself, for example, drops the Skull Ring, which was a wonder transposed from the soul of a soul feeder, a beast that insatiably absorbed souls to feed its own power. So when we transpose the curse-rotted Greatwood soul, we aren't getting items related to the Greatwood, we're kind of getting items that were related to the curses that were within the Greatwood. For example, one is the Spear of Arstor, who was this knight from Karim, fond of impaling his enemies, and he was credited with the dreadful creation of the Bite set of rings. This is one thing we get from within the Greatwood. Another is the Hollow Slayer Greatsword, which
Mirror Knight.
lurk within the minds of hollows.
A Knight of Mirror.
Is more effective at killing them. So this sword, it's fairly well known in Souls. It once belonged to Lucatiel of Dark Souls 2, and you might be able to see why the hollows of the undead settlement would seal this sword away. It was known for killing their kind, and that's one hell of a curse to them.
Lucatiel was also cursed.
Comments from the previous video before I end this video. Siesta Yon Jugo says, "Why do you assume Aldrich saw Yorshka in his dream? Wouldn't Priscilla make more sense?" So Siesta is referring to the fact that Aldrich can cast a version of Life Hunt Scythe, and Life Hunt Scythe was a spell that Priscilla used, and he's wondering why I think that Aldrich saw Yorshka. And he's right, Priscilla might make more sense in retrospect, but my thinking is based around my theory of a lot of the characters in the game. You know how earlier we were talking about Osiris and how he takes after Seath? Well, in my perspective, Osiris pretty much represents Seath in this game, and in the same sort of manner, Yorshka, to me, represents Priscilla. And that goes a bit more deeper than just being a descendant. I think that she fits the same role in this timeline as Priscilla did in her timeline. Priscilla was a crossbreed locked away in a painting near Anor Londo, and Yorshka is also a crossbreed locked away in a tower near Anor Londo. Both of them were probably locked away for being crossbreeds, and yeah, so when I say he dreamt of Yorshka, I assume that Yorshka would have the same Life Hunt Scythe skill, and Yorshka inhabits this world, whereas Priscilla hasn't been proved to inhabit this world. So that's why I said Yoshka, but yes, you're right, I think, because Aldrich is devouring Gwyndolin, who would probably have knowledge of Priscilla, even if it did occur a very long time ago. So that was my thinking. Hopefully it makes sense. But I'm glad for the chance to clarify. Guy Dude left a comment that basically summed up what I was talking about in the video. He says, "I want water souls, the future Aldrich saw now." And Aldrich says, "What?" And then Gabriel says, "Yeah, enough of this fire linking crap. I want to link the sink." And
link the sink. Plumber souls.
He ate my waifu, so I ended his life. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe, check out some more, maybe become a patron if you want to support the channel. But regardless, thank you for viewing this one, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Very, very cool videos on the bosses of Dark Souls 3. Thank you so much for coming along to my first video of reacting to Vaati's Dark Souls 3 lore. We will be checking out much more. He has done a Prepare to Cry series on Dark Souls 3 characters, secrets, the Dark Souls 3 DLC. So when I am finding time, I will start to upload these videos every now and again as I refresh myself on the storyline of Dark Souls 3 and its lovely, lovely world. I can't wait to get to some particular videos on parts of Dark Souls 3 that I am very fond of. And with that one, guys, thank you so much for watching my reaction to this video. I hope you enjoyed it. It's been a lot of fun learning about Vaati's perspective on some of these bosses and their storylines as well. So again, looking forward to what's coming up in terms of his videos, and I'll see you then.